I rise today to support the middle-income tax cuts of 2010, which gives permanent tax relief to struggling American families that need it most. By extending the current rates for 98% of taxpayers, this bill provides the certainty and security necessary to protect working Americans, while at the same time indicating that we need help and that we ask upper income Americans to help address our growing fiscal deficits. Make no mistake, extending the current tax rates for the middle class, I believe, is crucial in order to encourage economic growth. The economic turmoil of the last 3 years has left many American families cash-strapped and struggling to stay afloat. Every extra dollar is critically important, and the evidence bears this out. Analysis by the Congressional Budget Office indicates that lower and middle-income taxpayers have a higher tendency to spend every dollar they earn. Consequently, by ensuring that tax rates don't rise on lower and middle-income earners, we prevent a dramatic decline in consumer spending that could have a negative impact on this fragile economic recovery. Today's job numbers are bad, in my view. They indicate we are far below what is necessary to reduce the unemployment rate. Unemployment remains persistently high, 12.4%, or over 2.2 million people in my state, California, unemployed, and 9.8%, or 15.1 million people across America unemployed. With economic growth projected to be slow in the near future, those numbers will likely not come down for some time. My colleagues, America is hurting right now. Those who can should step up and help. I know of no millionaire who needs a sustained tax cut of 4.6%, or who was asked for one, but I know several who are willing to step up and help. And that's the irony of this debate. Conversely, the evidence is extremely poor for extending tax cuts for wealthy Americans. When the CBO analyzed a number of different policies aimed at creating jobs, sustained tax cuts for the wealthy came in dead last. Interesting. On the other hand, permanently extending the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy would require $700 billion more in deficit spending. They're unpaid for. In light of this report issued Wednesday by the President's Fiscal Commission, of which some of my colleagues are members, I simply cannot argue for an extension of the upper income brackets. It would be one thing if I could say that Bush tax cuts for the wealthy contributed to an era of substantial economic growth and prosperity. But here's the key. History does not support that. In 2001, the first set of Bush tax cuts were proposed as a means of stimulating the economy as we emerged from the dot-com bubble. Of course, we were also projected to have a $5.6 trillion 10-year budget surplus. And we all know that when President Clinton left office, he left a surplus. In light of these facts, the fact that there was money, there was a surplus, I voted for the first round of Bush tax cuts. I believe that the government surpluses should be returned to the American people. But as President Bush was leaving office, we were forced to confront some very sobering truths. The 10-year budget deficit was projected to be $6.3 trillion, not the $5.6 trillion surplus that we had thought. There was a total turnaround, and the national debt had increased by over 80%. The argument made by Republicans, if you remember during that time, was deficits don't matter. It doesn't matter that the Iraq War wasn't funded. The tax cuts didn't matter. Deficits don't matter were reiterated throughout this chamber. And the belief was that lower income tax rates would actually increase revenue for the federal government. This has been debunked by recent history. CBO data shows that changes in law between 2001 and 2005 resulted in deficit increases of $539 billion, and the Bush tax cuts accounted for nearly half that amount. However, the most scathing indictment against extending these tax cuts for the wealthy is illustrated in our recent history of income inequality and wage stagnation. From 2003 to 2007, incomes for families in the top 5% of taxpayers increased by 7%, while incomes for the other 95% of taxpayers remained stagnant. So from 2003 to 2007, the only incomes that increased were the top 5%. Everybody else remained stagnant. So the economy was clearly working for the upper 5%, but not for anybody else. The average income of top 1% of income earners increased by 10 times as much as that for the bottom 90%. That's an amazing figure if you think about it, that the 1% gained 10 times more in income than all of the other 90% of taxpayers. During the expansion of 2002 to 2007, families saw their median income drop by $2,000. That's the first time Americans have seen their incomes drop during a period of economic growth. So there was growth, but the median income was dropping during that period of time. During this period also, income tax rates for the top 1% of earners were reduced by twice as much as rates for anyone else. Top 1% today, and under the Bush years, are paying less in taxes than they did in the Clinton years. So there was actually a drop in rate for the top 1%. In 2007, the top 10% took home almost half of the country's total earnings, which translates to the highest level of income inequality in our nation's history. In that year, 2007. We face a number of daunting problems. Our national debt is now in excess of $14 trillion. If we continue deficit spending, we will unquestionably begin to constrict economic opportunity for this generation and those that follow. Our economy is struggling to grow at a pace that will start providing jobs, we hope, for over 14 million out of work. Income inequality today is, I think, at a historic high, and it is an unacceptable high. In light of these facts, I don't see the merit in the argument that a permanent extension of the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy will have a materially beneficial impact on the economy. And I applaud Chairman Baucus for introducing a responsible bill recognizing these stark realities. If we were to do this, we increase income inequality. If you continue to raise the lower taxes for the top brackets, all you do is increase income inequality. You grow the gap between the rich and the poor. And I would suggest, Mr. President, that that bodes ill for the United States of America. Chairman Baucus also included two key provisions in this bill, and I'd like to take a few moments to speak of them. This summer, I introduced a bill that would allow family farmers to defer their estate tax payments until they sold the farm or took it out of operation as a farm. The idea was to make sure small working family farms avoid having to make crippling decisions about their land when it came time to pay the estate tax. And let me explain why. Family farms today in America are land rich and cash poor. Farm incomes have not kept pace with rising land values in this country, which puts family farms in a precarious position when it comes to settling estate tax bills. Because family farmers often have little cash on hand to pay the estate tax, they can be forced to sell land to developers in order to make good on the estate tax. Over multiple generations, this can decimate the operation of a farm. This proposal before us today would preserve the existence of family farms by allowing them to defer paying the estate tax until they are taken out of operation and to reassess it at a stepped-up value at that time. By doing this, we can preserve and strengthen existing family farms, which I strongly believe are part of the fabric of this country. This provision would not be available to everyone. It includes income and asset restrictions in order to ensure that the deferral benefit goes only to farmers who need it most and not agribusinesses. If farmers who elect deferral fall out of compliance with the requirements, they would face a recapture penalty in the amount of the estate tax owed. It is my hope that in this way we can help ensure the continued existence of family farms, and I applaud the chairman for including this provision. The legislation also includes a 2-year extension of the highly successful Treasury grant program, which has been widely credited with maintaining strong economic growth in the renewable energy sector in 2009 and 2010, despite the severe economic turndown. The grant program has proven a particularly effective job creation tool. According to a Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory study, the program has enabled hundreds of renewable energy projects to move forward and saved more than 55,000 American jobs in the wind industry alone. Prior to the economic meltdown, clean energy project developers relied on tax equity partnerships with investors to take advantage of clean energy tax incentives. In 2008, the economic meltdown froze the $8 billion tax equity market, jeopardizing billions of dollars in clean energy investment. The Treasury grant program proved an effective replacement for these partnerships, supporting about $18.2 billion in clean energy investment to build 8,600 megawatts of renewable energy generation through October 25th of this year. With most utilities and developers still unable to utilize existing production and investment tax credits, and our nation's economic recovery dependent on the creation of new jobs, this 2-year extension of the grant program is critical. According to a survey of all leading participants in the tax equity market, without an extension of the program, the anticipated financing available for renewable energy is expected to decrease by 56% in 2011. In contrast, a recent study found that a 2-year extension of the Treasury grant program would result in nearly 65,000 more jobs in the solar industry alone, and enough additional solar power to power more than 1.2 million homes. So it's important to emphasize that this is not a new federal incentive program. It simply allows clean energy companies to utilize existing investment and production tax credits without having to partner with Wall Street banks. In conclusion, Mr. President, I believe it's important to underscore who is bearing the brunt of the pain being doled out by the economic downturn and the subsequent weak recovery. The top 2% of taxpayers are not the ones suffering during this crisis. In fact, with sales of luxury goods set to surge to their highest peak since the recession began in 2007, the recovery for the richest Americans seems well underway. They are able to do well for one reason or another in this economy. But it's the income groups below them that are not, that can't get the loans, that can't meet the payrolls, whose homes are being foreclosed on, who have great difficulties surviving in this most difficult economic marketplace. So let's not forget why we are faced with this impending tax increase in the first place. The Bush tax cuts were designed to sunset because they weren't paid for. They weren't paid for because we were told they would lead to higher revenues. In fact, that has not happened. It's time to let the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy Americans expire. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.